Hello! Right, in the last video, if you got through that, well done. We did a basic setup of a Node.js environment, installed various different modules, and wrote our first bit of the API, which allows people to sign up. But before we get too much into the rest of this API, I want to do some abstractions. And also make a couple of comments that I had back from people who were following along. The first thing I want to say is I haven't included any of the details of setting up MySQL or creating a schema or creating the user or anything like that. You can install MySQL using, they've got some community tool that will do that. And then you can create a database and you can create a user, or you can use your root username, the username of root and the password for your root in here. And basically you just need to change this bit here where we've got under create connection to whatever your details are and whatever your sort of database is, whatever schema you've decided to create. Obviously I wasn't going to put my root password or any serious stuff in here, so I've just made it all Dave test because it's just for this video. But really what I want to touch on in this is the art of abstraction, sort of getting some of this code to look a little bit more pleasurable to deal with. So for example, I've got lots of these things here where I've got promises happening with database calls, and I open the connection and then I close the connection, and sometimes you sort of want to do that, but there's a hell of a lot of stuff going on here, and if you forget to close a connection at some point, you know, you're going to end up with connections being left open until they time out, and you might end up with your database running out of available connections. So I want to get all of this database stuff and chuck it all in my DDF general. So the database stuff is abstracted out of the main modules, and we just deal with this, and that will handle everything for us. So let's start by doing our first bit, which is just getting some data from a database. Let's say we just want to get some records. So DB query. I'm going to call this DB query. Okay, and this is going to be a function which is going to take in our query, and it's going to take in some parameters, and that's and then it's going to return the results from that. So within this, I will need to get a connection. So I'll say var con equals this dot get con, because I want to get my connection, and immediately I'm going to end the connection as well. And then I need to put async in front of that, because this function is going to run asynchronously. So now I do need to do a var data equals con dot promise, because we're going to have it as a promise, dot query, and then we're going to pass it the query that we put in up there and the parameters that we passed into the function. We need to put await before that. I don't want to forget to do that, because we need to wait for the data to come back on the promise. Now, in the last video, we saw that whatever comes back from the MySQL database comes back as an array. And there's two items in that array, the first item of which is the data that we're interested in. So the first thing we'll be looking at is just basically trying to get the first element out of that data, which is all we want to return. So if I get rid of that and go return data 0, that will give us all of our data back, or it should give us all of our data back from the database that we want, without any of the other stuff that we're not interested in. Obviously, that data it's returning will be an array of all the rows in the data. So the next thing I want to do is db get single row. So if I just want to get a single row of data, I want to do an async function on this. And this will also have a query and a parameter. So I'm going to say var data equals this await this dot DB query, and I want to pass it the query and the parameter. So we're going to get back the whole table of data, which might be more than one row. But if we only want the first row out of it, then I'm going to return data 0. So that's just going to get us our single row. And then the final one I'm going to do here is db get single value, which will just get a single value from a database, from a function, which is really useful. So this is again going to be an async function with a query and a parameter. But this time as well, I'm going to have a default value. And then that way we can override it if it doesn't return anything. So I'm going to do var data equals await this dot get single row. So I want to get the single row out of that. And I want to pass in the query, and I'm passing the parameter. So every time I pass this a query, I'm going to make sure that the column header for what I'm looking for, because it's only a single value, will always be val. So I'm going to say data equals data, because that's what's coming back for the whole row, dot val, or I'm going to use the double question marks. If it doesn't equal that, then we're going to go for default value. Now, if the default value is nothing, because it's not passed in, then it will still be nothing. But that's just basically saying we're either going to get the val property, the val column from the first row of data, or we're going to go with the default value, which may again be absolutely nothing. And then we're going to return the data. So we've kind of got these three things that chain together. So we've got this first one here, this first function, which basically just gets all the data, as many rows as you want from the query. This one here basically calls that, but only returns the first row. And this one here calls that, but only returns a single value, which is the .val. And that means now, in theory, if all of that works, we'll see whether I've had any bugs in that. I should be able to replace all of my database stuff that I've got in here with that. So, for example, we can get rid of the connection. And I can say await ddf dot, this is getting a single row, isn't it? It's a single value. So I say ddf dot get single value, which is what I want. And then I want to make that as val. And then what I'm looking for is I'll get rid of this, because that db RSP will be the value that I'm looking for. I could put a default value in there, but I'm not going to, because the count will always return something. And then I've got rid of the need to end my connection there as well. Okay, so we're going to see if this works or not. So I'm going to do a console.log db RSP. I'm going to get the response there and log it out into the console at the bottom. So let's save that, go to the bottom there, and send with Postman, which I used in the last video. I'm going to send that request. It will create an error at the moment because I got rid of the connection variable, which down here, these here still want to use that connection variable that I got rid of. But we should have, although we've got the error, we should have the database response, which is 0, which is good. That's correctly working. And if I go back to here and I change this to no reply, which I know is in the database, we've got user with email already exists. So that means it did actually find that and gave us a 1, and it's still saying con is not defined. So let's handle inserting, because inserting doesn't return a kind of a record set the same way that a query does, but I'm interested in getting the insert ID from it. So let's wrap this one up here. I will copy this DB query one here, and I will say db insert, and then we will do the same again, and I'll get the data out. But what I want to return is the data, but with .insert ID at the end. So let's go back to here now and replace these inserts with that. So ddf.db insert, and then that will insert that into that and basically give us back our user data.id. So I can do user data.id directly up here. And I don't need the var because we're not creating a new variable here. So this will basically insert the record and then return the ID. And then again, I want to do the same here. I want to get rid of the con.promise and all of that, and say ddf.insert db insert insert into sorts, and that will also return the value, but I'm not interested in the value it returns this time. And then we create the token, and everything works there. So we've basically abstracted all of our database, the actual kind of mechanism of creating a connection and closing the connection and all of that. We've abstracted that to this here, which means we can now call that from any future modules. And if something changes or we want to do something different in the way we implement something, we can change it in one place rather than having to go through our code in loads and loads of different places. There's also the create token function down here, which again, I can get rid of the connection there, I can get rid of the connection there. I can get rid of this here and say ddf db insert. And that's just cleaned it up a bit. One thing I should point out is in the last video I missed out the question mark here before the toString. I don't know how necessary the toStrings were. I was kind of doing that just to have a belt and braces approach to it. I believe all of these that are coming in will be strings or string arrays. It's saying that it will be a string or a string array. And because I want these to definitely be strings, I put the toString, but I put this little question mark before. And that was more just to show you the practice of doing that. It's not really necessary in this case, but that's called optional chaining. Now, optional chaining is something that's very, very interesting. You can read about it by Googling it, but basically it enables you to be able to call a function on something without knowing whether the function really exists, or get a property without really knowing whether the property exists. So for example, if it goes userdata.password, and then it will try and run toString, and if it can't, it will return the userdata.password. But if it can run the toString, then it will return from the toString. It allows you to optionally chain functions to each other, which is fantastic. So I just thought I'd say a little bit more on that. So the other thing that I want to abstract out, we see we've got all these res.sends with all these different statuses and stuff, and that's going to get messy because let's say in the last video I had errors, and then earlier on down here I'd written error, and then I changed that to errors to standardize it. So if I look at this here, I want to abstract this out and be able to return various things that I might want to return. So let's go over here, and I will create a new function. And on this one, I'm going to say res send. I'm going to call it res send because it's going to handle the response.send. And I need to pass it the response object. And then I want to give it a status. And then I want to give it whatever data I am passing through. And I want to give it any errors that I am passing through as well. So I'm going to have 4 parameters on this. And basically I want to, the data is going to equal an itself or an empty object. The status is going to equal itself, or it's going to, in fact, I'm going to do the chaining on that as well. Make sure that's a string. Don't know what's going on with my typing. I'm trying to talk and type at the same time. Or it's just going to equal OK, because if we don't give a status, then it's just going to be OK. In fact, I'm going to swap some of these round so we can, by default, just send a response and some data. So if we leave this out, it will automatically equal OK. And then the errors is either going to equal errors, or it's going to equal just a blank array. And we're going to format that so our response JSON is going to be equal to an empty object, and then we're going to do RSP JSON dot status equals status. I'm going to do my response JSON dot errors equals errors, which hopefully will be nothing. Our response JSON dot data is going to equal data, whatever data we passed across, and then we're going to res.send, and we're going to do JSON.stringify RSP JSON. So basically what we're getting here is we're making a function where we can send it the response object. We're going to send some data that we want to do, an optional status, which will be OK if we don't send anything, and then any errors. So one thing I want to do here is look at the errors. The errors might come through as a single string or as an array of different errors. And what I want to do is make sure that it's always an array. So if I get a string, then it's going to basically just be an array with only one value in it. So I'm going to say if not errors dot well, I don't want to do that, sorry, array dot is array errors. So if it's not an array, errors is going to equal an array with errors in it. So I'm going to basically turn errors into an array. And now I can get rid of some of these res.sends in here. So this res.send with all this stringify stuff. The only bit I'm really interested in is this error message there. So I want to do ddf.resSend, and I want to pass it the response object, and then the data will be nothing. The status will be error, and the data for the errors will be that string that I put there. So now if I run this in Postman, we will get the error coming back. And we're now getting status error. The error's coming through, user with email already exists. And we've also got this empty data object, which is what we want because there isn't any other data being sent with that. Let's go back to the code. So now I can do that everywhere. We've got res.send. So I've got res.send. This is just an OK. So this will be sending the token as well. So I want to say res send, res, again, send through the res object. And I want to put the data in, which is just the token. So if that works, we'll do that. And then I will do here as well. This is just sending all the errors as an array. So this will be, I know what I didn't do there, put ddf dot in front of it. And we're going to do ddf.resSend. And again, this one here, I need to send the response object. There'll be no data on this one. I'll put that in as null to keep it the same. The status of this will be error. And the errors on this will be the errors that we pass through. So now if I go back to Postman, if I send this, I get that error. If I get rid of the first name, for example, I now get my errors back like that. And if I get rid of this as well, so you can see there's now 2 errors in there. So this is working pretty nicely. And if I type in my name again, and I'll change this to daviddominy2.com, which doesn't exist as far as I know. There's not 2 of us. I'll click on send, and then I get status OK, and then I don't get any errors, and then I get data, and my token is within that data. Now, I could take that one step further, which I will, of course, is I could actually, where I've got that token, is I could actually name that within the data. I could then put that in curly braces like that. So the data is actually going to become its own JSON object. So if I now go back to Postman, and let's change this to spuds at 2020rendezvous.com, which is a project that I'm very proud of, 2020rendezvous.com. If I click on send there, it will sign me up, and it will now, within the data, send back the object that will be named token, or the string which will be named token in the key value pair within the object. So it just gives you much more scope for standardization. We can also go one step further with certain bits and pieces, and I can actually standardize these messages that you might want to get. So I will say res statuses, and I will set this to object.freeze, which basically means you're not going to be changing the object. And I want to make the OK status equal to OK in capitals. I want to set the error status equal to error with a capital there. I didn't do a colon there. And then there are 2 statuses that we can call on. So instead of this default one here up in OK, I can actually say this.resstatuses.OK. And then if I wanted to change that, for example, for language, or I want to make sure that I didn't mistype it, then I'm doing something that auto-completes. And same back here where I've got errors, where I've got error as a string. I'm going to do ddf.resstatuses.error, and then that will make sure that the language is the same without any problems. So res statuses.error. That should actually be ddf. So if I now search in there for res.send, we don't find any, which is fantastic. Now this bit here may look a little bit overkill, but when you've got a lot of different statuses you might want to send back, and you don't want people making spelling mistakes and putting in, if you want to change a status or something while you're developing, you might settle on a status and then at a later time change your mind on that, and go, actually, we want to have this as the status, or we want to capitalize it or not capitalize it or whatever. It's nice to be able to change it in one place and not have to deal with going through all your code and doing some sort of search and replace, which then will find something that wasn't really a status message. And then, I've been there too many times doing that kind of stuff, and that's why it's just nice to abstract stuff out. So that there, you can see we've kind of got rid of all of our MySQL stuff, so we can now lose this this MySQL module out of there, because that's now only existing here. And then in future, if I want to do anything with the database, if I write it as a function in here, that means it can be reused throughout the whole project. So I hope you found that useful. The next video, I'm going to get on with writing the kind of like the sign in and the confirm account and other bits and pieces. Then we'll get into the HTML front end, and we'll see where we go. I'm just kind of building a template project that will do a lot of standard things that I'd want to do. Yeah, there's so much more to do. I also want to do a component where you can kind of put any sort of random data in a sort of a JSON object type way, where you can have a key value pair against users. So you can say, I want to store this bit of information about this user, and it will just handle it and then bring it back when you want it. So yeah, there's plenty more to get into, but I think that's enough for this video. That last one was far too long. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, and please check out 2020 Rendezvous as well. Very proud of that. Thank you very much.